The scent of old paper and rain was the smell of my life. For 3 years, it had been the constant atmosphere of my days, a perfume of brittle history and damp wool coats. I worked as a junior archivist for the Croft Foundation, a quiet job in a quiet building downtown, preserving the records of a city that had mostly forgotten them. It suited me. The silence was a comfortable blanket, the meticulous work a dam against the messier currents of my own thoughts. Most days, I was content in my managed solitude, a life ordered for safety above all else. But some days, the quiet felt less like a comfort and more like a cage. On those days, my attention would drift from the faded ink of a 100-year-old ledger to the man who made it all possible, Julian Croft. He was a quiet man himself, the kind of wealthy that didn't announce itself with noise and flash, but with the steady, gravitational pull of his presence. He was older than me, maybe by 20 years, with lines around his eyes that spoke of long hours spent reading rather than laughing, and silver at his temples that looked like intentional, elegant brushstrokes. He rarely visited the archives, preferring the top floor where deals were made and the foundation's future was secured. But when he did, the air itself seemed to change. The dust motes danced a little slower in the shafts of light from the high windows. My own breathing would deepen, my hands becoming suddenly clumsy on the delicate manuscript pages. I would watch him from the corner of my eye as he spoke in low tones to my supervisor, his voice a calm, resonant hum that seemed to settle deep in my bones. He never stayed long. A brief consultation, a nod of approval, and then he was gone, leaving behind an echo of his clean, subtle cologne, sandalwood, and something crisp, like gin. I kept a small, smooth river stone on my desk, one he had used as a paperweight during a brief visit 6 months prior. He had forgotten it, and I had never bothered to return it to the decorative bowl in the reception area. It was a foolish, sentimental thing, a secret anchor to a man who likely did not remember my name. It was a tangible piece of my yearning, a cool, solid weight in my palm when the loneliness of my small apartment felt particularly sharp at night. That Tuesday, the rain started in the afternoon, a gentle drumming that turned into a relentless, angry downpour by 5 o'clock. It was the kind of storm that made the old building groan, the wind whistling through the window frames like a mournful ghost. My supervisor, Maria, left early, her face tight with worry about flooding in her basement. Most of the other staff followed, a hurried exodus of boots and umbrellas. I stayed behind. A new acquisition had arrived, the personal diaries of a turn-of-the-century industrialist, and the leather bindings were showing signs of moisture damage from the trip. I couldn't leave them like that. I was carefully blotting a damp cover with archival cloth when the lights flickered once, twice, and then died completely. The sudden plunge into darkness was absolute, accompanied by the groan of the building's ancient generator failing to kick in. For a moment, I was frozen, my hand hovering over the diary. The only sound was the storm hammering against the glass and the frantic thumping of my own heart. This was it, the catalyst. The moment the carefully ordered world of my work was thrown into chaos, and the carefully ordered world of my heart right along with it. My phone's flashlight cut a weak, trembling beam through the oppressive dark. The diaries. They were vulnerable here. The humidity in the unconditioned air would be a disaster. I knew the protocol: secure sensitive materials in the climate-controlled vault in the sub-basement. A task that was daunting with a full team and terrifying alone. I was fumbling with the heavy lid of the first archival box when a second, much stronger beam of light sliced through the darkness from the doorway. "Leo, is that you?" The voice was calm, steady, and utterly unmistakable. It was Julian Croft. My breath hitched. I felt a flush of heat crawl up my neck, a ridiculous mix of embarrassment at being found fumbling in the dark and a sharp, electric thrill at his presence. He walked towards me, his expensive leather shoes making almost no sound on the polished concrete floor. The beam of his flashlight was steady, professional, not betraying a hint of panic. "Mr. Croft," I managed, my own voice sounding thin. "I was just securing the new acquisition." The humidity. I trailed off, feeling foolish for stating the obvious. "A good thought," he said, his light joining mine on the open box. "Let me help you. The main vault is the best place for these." He didn't ask, he stated it as a fact, but his tone made it a shared mission, not an order. He rolled up the sleeves of his immaculate white shirt, revealing strong forearms dusted with fine, dark hair. He moved with a quiet competence that I had only ever observed from a distance. Up close, it was mesmerizing. We worked in near silence for the next hour, a strange, focused ballet in the dark. Our flashlight beams crossed and uncrossed, illuminating the task at hand. He was surprisingly strong, lifting the heavy boxes with an ease that belied his tailored suit. I found a rhythm with him, anticipating his movements, having the next box ready. The storm raged outside, a wild soundtrack to our quiet, urgent work. In the small bubble of our shared light, the vast, dark archive seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of us. I was intensely aware of him, of the space between us. The scent of his cologne was more present now, mingling with the rain and old paper. Once, his hand brushed mine as we both reached for the same box lid. The contact was brief, accidental, but a jolt went through me, sharp and clean as lightning. I pulled my hand back as if burned. He gave no sign that he noticed, his expression unreadable in the shifting light. But I felt the weight of that fleeting touch long after it was gone. It was a brand on my skin. When the last box was sealed inside the vault, we stood for a moment in the echoing silence of the sub-basement. The only sound was our breathing. "Thank you, Leo," he said, his voice softer now. "You stayed when you didn't have to. You protected the collection." He shone his light on my face, and I felt pinned by his gaze. It wasn't accusatory or assessing, but something else. Something I couldn't name. It was a steady, quiet regard that made me feel truly seen for the first time. "It's my job," I mumbled, looking down at my hands, which were smudged with dust. "It's more than that," he corrected gently. "It's care. It's a rare quality." He turned to lead the way back upstairs, and I followed the steady beam of his light, my heart still beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. When we reached the main lobby, the security guard confirmed what we already suspected. The power was out across half the city. The trains weren't running. The streets were flooding. Michael, Mr. Croft's driver, was stranded on the other side of town. There was a pause, a pocket of silence where the only sound was the unrelenting drumming of the rain on the glass roof of the atrium. I was calculating the cost of a cab I couldn't afford, dreading the long, wet walk to a bus line that was probably shut down. "I'll drive you home," Julian Croft said. It wasn't a question. It was a simple, declarative statement, as solid and immovable as the granite foundation of the building around us. And in that moment, I knew that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one that was just beginning inside of me. The quiet foundation of my life was about to be tested, and I had no idea if it would hold. The drive was a study in contrasts. Outside, the storm threw sheets of water against the windows of his car, a dark, chaotic world of flooded streets and swaying trees. Inside, it was a sanctuary of quiet warmth and leather. The car, a sleek black sedan whose make I couldn't even guess, moved through the deluge with an unnerving calm. It was insulated from the world, a protective bubble moving through the night. And sitting beside me, at the wheel, was the source of that calm, Julian Croft. He drove with the same focused competence he'd shown in the archive. His hands rested on the steering wheel, steady and sure. They were capable hands, I thought, not the soft, manicured hands I might have expected of a man of his wealth. There were faint calluses on his palms, visible when he turned the wheel, and his nails were clean but short, practical. I watched the way his thumb stroked the smooth leather, a small, unconscious gesture. It was hypnotic. I was hyper-aware of his proximity. The space between us and the wide seats felt both vast and electrically charged. I could feel the warmth radiating from him, could smell that clean scent of sandalwood and rain. I kept my own hands clenched in my lap, my damp coat a cold, clammy barrier. I was afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly, afraid of breaking the strange, fragile spell of the moment. "You're quiet," he said after several long minutes, his voice a low rumble that didn't startle me. It fit the quiet hum of the engine. "Sorry," I said, my voice coming out as a croak. I cleared my throat. "Just a long night, it was," he agreed. He glanced at me, his eyes catching the intermittent glow of a passing headlight. It was a brief look, but it felt significant. The weight of his gaze was a physical thing. "Thank you again for your help. Maria told me you've been doing excellent work with the Cartwright collection." My stomach did a nervous flip. He knew about my work. He knew my name. He had spoken to Maria about me. It was a small thing, a professional courtesy, but it felt like a crack of light in my solitary world. I enjoy it, I said, the words an understatement of massive proportions. The history, it feels important, it is, he said, his focus back on the slick road. Remembering where we came from is the only way to figure out where we're going. Most people have forgotten that. We fell back into a comfortable silence. It wasn't awkward. It was a shared quiet, filled with the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the hum of the tires on wet pavement. I found myself analyzing every small thing, every nuance. The way he paused before speaking, as if weighing each word. The slight frown of concentration on his face as he navigated a particularly deep puddle. I was cataloging him, the same way I would catalog a new acquisition, trying to understand his history, his provenance, from these small, observable details. I wondered what he saw when he looked at me. A junior employee, 23 and probably looking younger, with a cheap coat and a perpetually worried expression. Did he see the financial stress that kept me up at night, the loneliness that was my constant companion? Or was I just a responsibility, another part of the foundation he had to manage? This thought sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with my damp clothes. The power imbalance between us was a chasm, wide and deep. He was my employer, a man whose net worth was probably more than the entire city budget. I was a tenant in a rundown apartment, counting my dollars to make it to the end of the month. He was being kind. That was all. A decent boss looking out for his employee on a dangerous night. To imagine anything more was a flight of fancy, a dangerous indulgence that could only lead to disappointment. I repeated this to myself like a mantra, a shield against the ridiculous hope blooming in my chest. He is just being kind. I gave him my address, the words feeling heavy and embarrassing in my mouth. It wasn't a good neighborhood. The buildings were old and neglected, the streetlights few and far between. I felt a flush of shame as he turned onto my street, the powerful headlights of his car sweeping over peeling paint and cracked pavement. This was my world, so far removed from his own. He pulled up in front of my building and put the car in park, but he didn't turn off the engine. The rain was still coming down hard, drumming on the roof of the car. He looked from the building back to me, his expression unreadable. "This is it," I said, my hand hovering over the door handle. The moment was ending. The bubble was about to burst. I would get out, he would drive away, and tomorrow he would be Mr. Croft again, a distant figure on the top floor, and I would be the quiet archivist in the basement. The thought was surprisingly painful. "Let me walk you to your door," he said. Again, not a question. "You don't have to do that, Mr. Croft." "I'll be fine, Julian," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "My name is Julian." "And I insist." He turned off the engine, plunging us into a deeper silence, the rain suddenly much louder. He grabbed a large, black umbrella from the back seat and got out, coming around to my side before I could even process the shift. He opened my door, the umbrella a shield against the downpour. As I stepped out of the car, my foot slipped on the wet curb. I stumbled, and his hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around my upper arm to steady me. His grip was strong, warm even through the fabric of my coat and shirt. It was not a fleeting, accidental brush this time. It was a deliberate, supportive touch. My breath caught in my throat. He held on a second longer than necessary, his thumb pressing gently into my arm before he let go. "Careful," he murmured, his voice close to my ear. I could feel the warmth of his breath. I just nodded, unable to speak. The meaningful touch. Small, ambiguous, but it sent tremors through my entire system. We walked the few steps to the main door of my building, huddled together under the wide umbrella, the sound of the rain a roaring in my ears that drowned out everything but the frantic beating of my own heart. The front door of my building was, as usual, a struggle. The old lock was rusted and finicky. I fumbled with my keys, my fingers suddenly cold and clumsy. Julian stood patiently beside me, holding the umbrella, a silent, looming presence in the dark. The sheer absurdity of the situation struck me. A man who probably owned buildings like this one was standing in the rain, waiting for me to jimmy open a broken lock. "Here," he said, his voice gentle. He took the keys from my trembling hand. His fingers brushed against mine, a spark of warmth in the cold night. He worked the key in the lock with a practiced, patient dexterity. After a moment, there was a satisfying click, and the door swung inward, opening onto a dimly lit, musty-smelling hallway. "Thank you," I said, taking my keys back. Our fingers touched again. This time, I didn't pull away. I let the contact linger for a fraction of a second, a silent acknowledgement. His eyes met mine in the gloom, and I saw something flicker in their depths, a question, a hesitation. It was there and then gone. We climbed the 3 flights of stairs to my apartment, our footsteps echoing on the worn linoleum. The power was out here, too. The only light came from the emergency fixtures, casting long, eerie shadows down the corridor. When we reached my door, number 3B, I faced the same problem. Another old, sticking lock. This time, I was determined to do it myself. It was a point of pride, however small. I inserted the key, jiggling it, putting my shoulder into the door. It was a familiar, frustrating dance. Julian watched me, his arms crossed over his chest. He didn't offer to help this time. He just watched, his presence a quiet weight behind me. Finally, with a groan of protest, the lock turned. I pushed the door open into the pitch-black darkness of my apartment. A wave of cold air washed over us. It was colder inside than it was in the hallway. I stepped in, fumbling along the wall for the box of matches I kept on the small entry table. My fingers found the familiar cardboard, and I struck one. The small flames sputtered to life, casting a flickering, inadequate light. I turned back to him. He was still standing in the doorway, a tall silhouette against the dim light of the hall. He hadn't moved. He was just looking, not at the apartment, but at me. "Thank you for the ride, and for everything," I said, my voice feeling small in the sudden intimacy of the space. He took a step inside, letting the hallway door click shut behind him. The sound was deafeningly final. He was inside, in my space. The flickering matchlight danced across the sharp planes of his face. He looked around my small living room, his gaze taking in the threadbare armchair, the stacks of books on the floor, the single window where rain lashed against the glass. He wasn't judging, just observing. "This won't do," he said, his voice low and certain. It wasn't a criticism of my decor. It was a statement of fact about the cold, the darkness. "The temperature is dropping. It's not safe to stay here without heat." My match went out. I was plunged back into darkness, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could feel him there, a few feet away, a warm, solid presence in the cold blackness. I heard him move, a soft rustle of clothing. "Leo," he said, his voice closer now. He sounded different. There was a note of something I couldn't identify. A vulnerability. "I know this is forward. I know my position makes things complicated, but I would feel better if I stayed. Just until the power is back on. I worry about my employees' well-being." Perhaps more than is strictly professional, there it was. A moment of softness. An admission that broke through the carefully constructed walls of our professional relationship. He was explaining his boundaries, or rather, the blurring of them, to ensure my comfort. He was giving me an out, framing his concern in a way that I could accept or reject. He was asking an honest question without asking it at all. He was opening a long locked door and waiting to see if I would step through. I am here now. This is a choice. My mind raced, trying to process the implications. He was in my apartment. He wanted to stay. He had admitted his concern was more than professional. The air was thick with unspoken feelings, with years of my own silent yearning. I fumbled for another match, needing to see his face. My hand was shaking so badly it took 2 tries. When the flame caught, I held it up. He was closer than I thought. I could see the genuine concern etched in the lines around his eyes. He wasn't playing a game. This was real. The quiet, unshakable Julian Croft was worried about me. And in that moment, something inside me, a tightly coiled spring of fear and caution, finally began to unwind. "Okay," I whispered, the word barely audible over the storm. "You can stay." We existed in a small bubble of candlelight. I had found a half-burned pillar candle on my kitchen counter and set it on the small coffee table between the armchair and the sofa. It cast long, dancing shadows, turning my cramped apartment into a space of strange and sudden intimacy. Julian sat on the lumpy sofa, which I'm sure was a decade past its prime, and I took the threadbare armchair. The silence between us was no longer the comfortable quiet of the car. It was charged, heavy with unspoken questions. He had taken off his suit jacket, folding it neatly and placing it beside him. In his white shirt sleeves, he looked less like the billionaire owner of the foundation and more like just a man. A very handsome, very composed man, but a man nonetheless. He seemed to fill the small room with his presence, not in an overwhelming way, but with a steady, grounding energy. I watched the candlelight flicker in his dark eyes. He was looking at the small collection of objects on my bookshelf, a few worn paperbacks, a chipped mug holding pens, the smooth river stone I'd taken from his office. His gaze lingered on the stone for a moment, and I felt a hot flush of embarrassment. Did he recognize it? Did he think I was some kind of strange collector of his forgotten things? I held my breath, but he said nothing, his expression giving no secrets away. To break the tension, I got up and went to the kitchen. "I can make tea," I offered. "I have a gas stove." It was a small, pathetic offering, but it was all I had. "That would be nice," he said, his voice warm. "Thank you." I busied myself with the kettle, my back to him. The small, routine actions were a comfort. Filling the kettle from the tap, lighting the burner with a match, finding 2 mugs that matched. My hands were shaking slightly. I was intensely aware of him behind me, of his eyes on my back. I felt scrutinized, exposed. This small, cheap apartment was a map of my life, of my struggles and my simple tastes. What must he be thinking, comparing this to his own world? The thought must have shown on my face when I returned with the tea, because he looked at me with a soft, understanding expression. He took the mug from my hand, his fingers brushing mine. This time, the touch was deliberate, gentle, a gesture of reassurance. "Thank you, Leo," he said again, his voice low. He took a sip of the tea, his eyes never leaving mine over the rim of the mug. "This is good." We sat for a while, sipping our tea in the flickering light. The storm outside seemed to be lessening, the angry hammering of the rain softening to a steady, rhythmic drumming. The quiet in the room stretched, becoming a canvas on which my own thoughts painted vivid, anxious pictures. The power dynamic between us was the elephant in the room, and I felt I had to address it, to name it before it crushed me. "You really don't have to be here, Mr. Croft," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I'm fine. I've been through power outages before, Julian." He corrected me gently for the second time. "And I know you have. But I wanted to be here." He set his mug down on the coffee table, the ceramic making a soft clink that sounded loud in the silence. His gaze was direct, unwavering. "Leo, can I be honest with you?" My heart leaped into my throat. "Yes." He leaned forward slightly, his forearms resting on his knees. The candlelight carved his face into angles and shadows. "My concern for you tonight, it isn't just about an employer's duty of care. I have found myself concerned for you for some time now. I've seen how hard you work. I've seen the care you put into everything you do. I've noticed you." The words hung in the air between us. "I've noticed you." 3 simple words that dismantled all my defenses. He had seen me, the quiet archivist in the basement, the man who thought he was invisible. He had seen me all along. A wave of emotion washed over me, disbelief, relief, and a terrifying surge of hope. But the fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. "You're my boss," I said, the words feeling blunt and clumsy. "There are rules. Complications, I am acutely aware of that," he said, his voice grave. "It is the only reason I have kept my distance. The absolute last thing I would ever want is to make you feel pressured or uncomfortable. Your safety, in every sense of the word, is my primary concern. That is why I am telling you this now, here, away from the foundation, so that you know my feelings are separate from your employment. Your job is secure, no matter what you say or feel right now. That is my promise to you." He was naming the power imbalance, confronting it head on. He was handing all the power in the interaction to me, giving me a clear, safe way out. It was the most respectful, most considerate thing anyone had ever done for me. And it was, in that moment, the thing that made me fall for him completely. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the billionaire, past the employer. I saw a man who was cautious and kind, and perhaps just as lonely as I was. A man who was taking a tremendous risk, laying his own feelings bare. I felt a sudden shiver, a deep chill that had settled into my bones from my damp clothes and the cold apartment. It was an involuntary reaction, a tremor that ran through my whole body. Julian's eyes immediately filled with concern. Without a word, he reached for his suit jacket, the expensive, beautifully tailored fabric a dark shape in the dim light. He stood up and walked the few steps to my chair. He didn't ask. He simply draped the jacket over my shoulders. The tipping point. The wool was heavy, impossibly warm, and smelled faintly of him. That scent of sandalwood and clean rain. The weight of it was a comfort, a solid, tangible thing. It was an act of such profound, simple care that it broke through my last reserve of fear. It was a protective gesture that made his feelings obvious without claiming any ownership of me. I pulled the jacket tighter around myself, burying my face in the collar for a moment, inhaling his scent. When I looked up at him, he was standing over me, his expression soft and questioning. The silence was no longer tense. It was waiting. This is it. This is the moment. You can retreat back into your safe, quiet world, or you can take a step forward into something unknown and terrifying and wonderful. Is this just about keeping an employee warm, Julian? I asked, my voice shaking slightly, but my gaze steady on his. I used his first name. The word felt right in my mouth. It felt like coming home. A slow smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, erasing the years and the worry. No, Leo, he said, his voice a low murmur. It's not. He didn't move, didn't press his advantage. He stood there, waiting. He was giving me the space to make the next move, to close the final distance between us. And I did. I reached up and my hand found his. His fingers laced with mine, a perfect, natural fit. His hand was warm and strong, and the soft gravity of his touch pulled me gently to my feet. We stood in the flickering candlelight, his jacket still around my shoulders, our hands clasped between us. He was so close now I could feel the heat of his body, could see the dark flecks in his brown eyes. The whole world seemed to shrink down to this single, quiet moment. The storm, the city, the foundation, it all faded away. I've noticed you too, I confessed, the words a quiet rush of air. For a long time, a look of profound relief washed over his face. He brought his other hand up to my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin with an incredible tenderness. His touch was hesitant, questioning, asking for permission with every gentle movement. I leaned into his hand, closing my eyes for a second, just savoring the feeling of being touched with such care. When I opened my eyes, he was looking at me with an expression of such open, honest yearning that it took my breath away. All the pretense was gone. We were just two people, standing in the dark, finally admitting a truth that had been hiding in plain sight for months. He lowered his head slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I met him halfway, rising on my toes slightly. And then his lips met mine. The kiss was not what I had expected. It wasn't a spark of electricity or a crash of lightning. It was something quieter, deeper. It was the feeling of a quiet foundation settling into place. His lips were soft, warm, and unbearably gentle. It was a kiss of profound reassurance, a question and an answer all in one. It was unhurried, unforced, and in its quiet certainty, it was the most passionate thing I had ever experienced. He tasted of tea and something that was uniquely him. I brought my free hand up to his chest, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart beneath my palm. It was beating as fast as my own. He wasn't as unshakable as he seemed. When we finally broke apart, we didn't move away from each other. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. We just stood there, breathing each other in. His jacket was a warm, heavy weight on my shoulders. Our fingers were still laced together, and his other hand was still cradling my face. It felt right. It felt like an arrival. Leo, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. His name for me, my name on his lips, held everything. All the waiting, all the uncertainty, all the hope. In that moment, a loud, mechanical hum shuddered through the building, and the lamp in the corner of my living room flickered to life. The power was back. The sudden, harsh glare of the electric light felt like an intrusion, a rude awakening from a beautiful dream. We both blinked, momentarily blinded. The shadows were gone, and my small, shabby apartment was laid bare in the unforgiving light. The moment of unease I had dreaded arrived right on cue. We were no longer two silhouettes in the romantic flicker of a candle. We were Julian Croft, billionaire philanthropist in a bespoke shirt, and Leo, the junior archivist in a worn sweater, standing in a room that probably cost less than his shoes. The chasm between our worlds, momentarily bridged by the darkness, suddenly felt miles wide again. I felt a wave of self-consciousness wash over me, and I started to pull away. But Julian's grip on my hand tightened, not painfully, but with a firm reassurance. His other hand moved from my cheek to the back of my neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin there in a soothing rhythm. "Don't," he said softly, his eyes searching mine. "Don't retreat." Nothing has changed, but everything had changed. The light had changed everything. I looked around my apartment, seeing it through his eyes. The crack in the plaster near the ceiling, the water stain from the upstairs neighbor's leaky pipe, the worn patch on the rug. It was a testament to a life lived on the edge of financial insecurity, a life he couldn't possibly understand. "Julian," I started, my voice tight. "Look at this place. Look at me. We're from different worlds." The old fear of dependency, of being seen as an opportunist, coiled in my stomach. He didn't let me finish. He shook his head, a small, firm gesture. "I am not looking at your apartment, Leo. I am looking at you." He stepped back slightly, but only to get a better look at my face. His expression was serious, intent. "The worlds we come from are just context. They are not who we are. I am a man who has been fortunate. You are a man of integrity and quiet strength. That is what I see. That is all that matters to me." His words were a balm on my raw nerves. He saw the imbalance, but he wasn't afraid of it. He was choosing to see past it, to see me. He was deliberately, quietly confirming that what had just happened between us was real and wanted, regardless of the change in lighting. He let go of my hand and walked to my small kitchen without a word. I watched, my heart still pounding, as he filled the kettle again. He moved with a surprising familiarity in the cramped space. He found the coffee canister, the filters, the small drip coffee maker I kept on the counter. The domesticity of the act was profoundly reassuring. He wasn't running away from the stark reality the light had revealed. He was making coffee. "Do you have a preferred mug?" he asked, his back to me. The question was so normal, so simple, it made me want to laugh. "The blue one," I said, my voice still a little shaky. "It holds more." He found it, and soon the apartment was filled with the rich, comforting aroma of brewing coffee. It was a scent of morning, of new beginnings. It felt like a deliberate act of reassurance, a way to ground us in the present moment. He brought the 2 mugs back to the living room and handed me the blue one. He had taken his jacket back from my shoulders and was now just in his shirt sleeves again, looking perfectly at ease as he sat on my lumpy sofa. We drank our coffee, the earlier silence returning, but this time it was different. It was comfortable, filled with a quiet understanding. The fear and uncertainty had not vanished completely, but they had receded, replaced by a fragile, tentative hope. He was still here. He had not left when the lights came on. The next morning at work was a trial. I was exhausted, having barely slept, my mind replaying every moment with Julian over and over. I was terrified of seeing him, of how we would act, of what had changed. I arrived early, hiding myself in the quiet solitude of the archives, my hands buried in my work. Around 10, Maria, my supervisor, came down. She was a sharp, perceptive woman who missed very little. "You look tired, Leo," she said, her eyes studying my face a little too closely. "Rough night with the storm?" "Something like that," I mumbled, not meeting her gaze. Just then, a junior executive from the top floor came into the archives, a rare occurrence. He was looking for some financial records from the early days of the foundation. He was also a notorious gossip. As he was talking to Maria, Julian appeared in the doorway. My entire body went rigid. He didn't look at me at first. He spoke to Maria, his tone its usual calm, professional cadence. But I felt his presence like a physical force. The nosy executive, Mark, turned to Julian. "Quite a storm last night, Mr. Croft. Hope you weren't stranded." Julian's gaze flickered to me for just a fraction of a second. It was a brief, steady look, devoid of any overt meaning, but it was a connection. A quiet, deliberate confirmation. "I managed," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I was glad to be able to ensure all my staff got home safely." His eyes met mine again, and this time there was a hint of warmth, a private message meant only for me. In that public moment, he created a bubble of privacy around us, protecting me from speculation while acknowledging what had passed between us. It was a masterclass in subtlety and care. Later that day, an email appeared in my inbox. It wasn't from Julian's official account, but a private one. The subject line was simply, "Tonight." The body of the message was brief. "Dinner. My place. If you'd like. I'll pick you up at 7". It was an invitation, not a summons. The choice was mine. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. This was it. The practical next step. A real date. A conscious choice to move forward. My fear warred with my desire. But then I thought of the steady warmth in his eyes, the gentle pressure of his hand, the way he had looked at me in the unforgiving light of my apartment without flinching. He had shown me his character, and it was solid and true. I typed back a single word. Yes, his home was nothing like I had imagined. I had pictured something cavernous and sterile, a museum of wealth. Instead, the car pulled up to a large, older house made of stone and dark wood, nestled amongst tall trees on a quiet, secluded street. It was grand, yes, but it felt like a home. Lights glowed warmly in the windows, and smoke curled from a chimney. He met me at the door himself. He was dressed casually, in dark trousers and a soft gray sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. He smiled when he saw me, a genuine, unguarded smile that made my stomach flutter. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice low and warm. He led me inside. The interior was beautiful, filled with books and art, comfortable-looking furniture, and the lingering scent of wood smoke and something delicious cooking. It was the home of a man with impeccable taste, but it was also clearly a space that was lived in, not just displayed. "I was in the middle of making dinner," he said, a little sheepishly. "I hope you like risotto." We ended up in his kitchen, a large, wonderfully equipped space that was nevertheless cozy. He handed me a glass of wine and put me to work stirring the risotto while he chopped herbs. We stood side by side at the large central island, the simple, cooperative task feeling incredibly intimate. This was the quiet intimacy I had never dared to dream of. We weren't a billionaire and his employee. We were two men making dinner together. We talked as we cooked, not about work or money or the foundation. We talked about books we'd read, places we'd traveled, our families. I told him about growing up in a small town, about my love for history that had started with my grandfather's stories. He told me about the immense pressure he'd felt taking over his family's company at a young age, and how he'd reshaped it into the foundation to do something that felt meaningful. He spoke of his own loneliness, the isolation that often came with his position. He was opening up to me, showing me the man behind the carefully constructed public persona. We ate at a small table in a breakfast nook that looked out over a sprawling, dark garden. The food was incredible, the wine was perfect, but mostly I was just mesmerized by him. By the way he listened, his eyes focused intently on my face as I spoke. By the way he laughed, a deep, warm sound that I wanted to hear again and again. After dinner, we sat on a comfortable sofa in front of a crackling fireplace. The conversation slowed, the silence between us comfortable and deep. He reached over and took my hand, his thumb stroking the back of it gently. "Leo," he said, his voice serious. "I want to do this right. I want to build something real with you, if you'll let me." Slowly, with care, he was naming our shared values, our boundaries. He was making a conscious choice and asking me to make one with him. "I want that too," I said, my voice thick with emotion. It was the truest thing I had ever said. He leaned in and kissed me again. This time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was a kiss of deep affection and shared promise, a seal on the new beginning we were choosing together. It was still gentle, still full of care, but it was also confident, sure. It was the kiss of a man who knew what he wanted, and what he wanted was me. Later, as we stood on his balcony, looking up at the stars that were finally visible after the storm, I leaned my head on his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around me, holding me close. The cool night air was a sharp contrast to the steady warmth of his body. I thought about how much had changed in just a few days. I had gone from being a solitary man, living a life of quiet desperation, to standing here, in the arms of a man who saw me, who valued me. The difference in our ages, in our wealth, hadn't vanished. They were still facts, part of the context of our lives. But they no longer felt like a cage or a chasm. They were simply part of the landscape, features of the world we would now navigate together. He had used his resources not to control or obligate me, but to create a space of safety where something real could grow. He had driven me home in a storm, yes, but he had also walked me through my own fear and doubt with patience and respect. He hadn't just stayed the night in my apartment. He had stayed to face the morning light with me. I felt his lips press a soft kiss to the top of my head. "You're thinking so hard," he murmured. I smiled, turning my face up to look at him. I'm just thinking, I said, that I feel like I'm home. The look in his eyes was all the answer I needed. I was no longer afraid. I was steady. I was part of a partnership, an equal partnership shaped by care and consent. And as he led me back inside, his hand warm and sure in mine, I knew that this was just the beginning. We had a foundation, and it was strong enough to build a life on. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.